Hello. Today we're going to talk about managing your weight. And I want to begin with a lovely quote that I found on Facebook because that's where all lovely things are found. Dieting is easy. It's like riding a bike. And the bike is on fire, and so is the ground, and everything is on fire because you're in hell. And if you've ever tried to lose weight, maybe you can relate to this. But first, the correct answer, folks, is C. But I wanted you to feel like you were in the classroom, so I had to throw in a poll question. Let's move on. We're going to talk about energy balance. And energy balance occurs when intake is equal to expenditure. In a few moments, I'll have a slide that tells you that when I use the word energy, I'm referring to calories. So energy balance occurs when the amount of calories that you are consuming is equal to the amount of calories that you are using or expending. And weight tends to be stable during this period. Positive energy balance occurs when the amount of calories you're taking in is greater than the amount of calories that your body is expending or using. During this period, body weight tends to increase, and you are said to be in positive energy balance. Negative energy balance occurs when the amount of calories or energy you're taking in is less than the amount of calories or energy you're expending. During this period of time, you tend to lose weight, and that is referred to as negative energy balance. Principles of energy balance are as follows. 1 pound of fat is equal to storing 3,500 calories. Now, I know that there's a lot of information out there saying a calorie isn't a calorie or that calories from protein is different from calories from fat. I will go over a study before this is over that kind of reinforces for me that a calorie is still a calorie. And for our purposes, this is what we're going to go with. In order to lose body fat, you need to be in a calorie deficit. You need to be in negative energy balance. In order to gain body weight or body fat, you need to be storing those calories, or a calorie excess needs to be created. So your body weight changes are based on the relationship of energy intake and energy expenditure. And this is quite the balancing act. Energy in, and for our purposes, we're going to talk about energy as equal to calories. Not the boost you feel after a strong cup of coffee, because that's from caffeine. But for our purposes, energy and calories are the same thing. So energy in are the calories that we're consuming. Energy out, or energy expended, is through 3 ways. BMR, or basal metabolic rate, physical activity and exercise, and something called the thermic effect of food. And we'll look at all of these right now. So energy intake is calories. The consumption of calories that we get from food and drinks. You need to know that all these calories add up, which is why I'm not a fan of sugar-laden sodas or juices, because I don't think folks should be drinking their calories unless you can afford it in what I like to call your calorie salary. These calories have been determined through something called a bomb calorimeter. What we're looking at is a piece of machinery that's known as this bomb calorimeter. You have your food in the middle in a little container, and it's surrounded by metal, and that's surrounded by water. And what happens is the water is heated up until that food item is totally broken down to ash. And that change in temperature is what's called a calorie. So calorie is actually a unit of heat. It's a measurement of heat. So energy intake are the calories that you consume. Energy expenditure are through basal metabolism, physical activity, and the thermic effect of food. Metabolic rate refers to how fast we burn calories in order to maintain normal body functions. And your basal metabolic rate is the minimum amount of energy required to maintain body functions apart from digestion. And this is the involuntary activities like breathing, nerve impulse transmission. Again, you don't want to have to think. Breathe in, breathe out. Those are involuntary activities. It's the energy required for the body to minimally function. Your heart to beat, your lungs to breathe, those involuntary activities required for living. It's usually determined during a fasting state when the body is completely at rest. It's not determined during sleep because some people move around a lot when they're sleeping. So it's determined when the body is at rest. And most of the energy expenditure in a sedentary person is used for basal metabolic activities. About 2/3 of the calories we consumed are used to maintain metabolic activities. There are a number of different factors that can affect your basal metabolic rate. Age, as we get older, our metabolism tends to slow down. Gender, males tend to have a higher basal metabolic rate than females because they tend to have a higher muscle mass. Testosterone tends to produce more muscle, and muscle is a more metabolically active tissue. This is why we recommend exercise, because for some people, and I'll talk more about this, it can help change their body composition. It will help decrease body fat and increase muscle mass. The reality is that change, that amount of calories required to maintain muscle, is not that much greater, but it certainly has a lot of other benefits besides increasing your basal metabolic rate. And I don't want you to exercise in order to be able to eat more calories. I think we need to separate exercise from eating, that we need to do that for two different reasons, and that's something that we hopefully can talk about. Physiologic state, people in a period of growth. When you're growing, you tend to have a higher basal metabolic rate. Pregnant women tend to have a higher basal metabolic rate. So there are different things that are going on in the body physiologically that can increase your metabolism. And surface area. A higher surface area or a greater surface area tends to use more calories. If we look at these boxes on the right, there are two different boxes. Well, actually, they both are made up of 8 boxes, but one is stacked, one on top of the other, and the other is in a 4x4. Is that right? 4x4? 2x2? 4x4. In any event, the one on the right has a greater surface area exposed to the environment than the one on the left. Imagine we're looking at two people. They weigh the same, but one is taller. The person who is taller has a greater surface area exposed to an environment and the body needs to be using more energy in order to maintain normal body temperature. A smaller surface area does not need to use as much energy. So that's why being taller is related to increased basal metabolic rate. The second way in which we expend energy is through physical activity, and this is voluntary movement. So BMR, or basal metabolic activities, are involuntary. Physical activities are voluntary movement of muscle. And it's the total amount of energy expended increases with body weight and intensity of exercise. So a larger person will expend more energy for the same physical activity as a lower weight person because they are moving more mass. And as they tend to lose body weight, the amount of energy expended for exercise can decrease. This is why it can be very frustrating to maintain the same rate of weight loss over time. The third category of energy expenditure is what's called the thermic effect of food. It's what's sometimes referred to as the food processing charge. About 5 to 10% of the total calories consumed is required for digestion, absorption, and assimilation of nutrients in the body. This is where that celery question sometimes comes up. Is it true that it takes more calories to eat celery than is actually in celery? And the absolute answer is no. 5 to 10% of the calories found in celery are used to digest, absorb, and metabolize celery. But the question that people should be asking is, why in the world would you be eating that much celery? We have different ways of assessing weight. One of them is body mass index. This is referred to as a broad stroke measure because it doesn't really tell us anything about the person's muscle mass or body mass. It's based on height and weight. It doesn't take into account age. It doesn't take into account gender or lean body mass. Now, I will tell you that I'm not going over numbers in this presentation because if you want to find out what your BMI is supposed to be based on your height and weight, you know where to look for those things. I don't want to cover them. So that's not going to be included in this presentation. Body composition is another way of assessing one's health. Let's look at these two people. They are the same weight, or at least they're supposed to be, depending on how well I formatted this picture. While their BMI would be the same because they're the same height and the same weight, their body composition is different. The person on the right has a higher muscle mass than the person on the left. So body composition is a better indicator in a number of cases of somebody's health risk. And then there are these other ways of assessing body composition. Some of you may have used skin calipers, the one in the lower right. The more experienced the person is at using these calipers, the more accurate the measurements will be. Electrical impedance is when an electrical current is sent through the body. Electricity travels differently through different tissues, and that can give you an estimate of body fat. Nobody's ever been electrocuted, so this is a very low-level electricity. Underwater weighing, because different tissue displaces water at a different rate. The bod pod is something that can be used to assess body composition. So these are a number of different tools that can be used to look at body composition. And then there's something called waist circumference or waist to hip ratio. This uses the high-tech instrument known as the tape measure. And actually, in older adults, it can be a better predictor of health risk than in younger adults. And this is where we get the apple versus pear person. The greater the amount of body fat around the abdomen, we would call that person an apple-shaped. The greater the amount of fat around the hips would be a pear-shaped person. And that fat found in the middle of the, the amount of fat found in the abdominal area, the apple-shaped person, we refer to that as intra-abdominal or visceral fat, fat found within the abdomen. Viscera is organs, so the amount of fat found in and around the organs. This person on the right has a greater amount of intra-abdominal or visceral fat, and this is associated with higher risk of chronic illnesses like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and high blood cholesterol or heart attack risk. There are a number of different factors involved in gaining weight or becoming overweight. Metabolic factors include something called the set point theory. And I have here in parentheses thermostat analogy because it's to remind me to talk about how this set point theory refers to the hypothesis that your brain regulates your weight, that in your what's called the ventromedial hypothalamus, no, you don't need to remember that, but you have a predetermined amount of weight. And if you go above that weight, your body tends to increase energy expenditure and decrease appetite. And if your body goes below that weight, for some reason your appetite increases and you wind up burning less calories. That's the thermostat analogy. Keep in mind that if you set the thermostat at a certain temperature, when it goes above that temperature, the air conditioning would go on. If it goes below that temperature, the heat would come on. So if you're using that as an analogy for set point theory, if your weight goes above that predetermined weight, your body works to lower that weight. If your body goes below that predetermined weight, your body works to increase back to that weight. You need physical activity. So what this is saying here is that maybe the set point theory doesn't hold for everybody. Remember, it's a theory. I'm not really sure how they can check this in anything other than mice. And we know about mouse research. Muscle tissue has a higher metabolic rate than fat. I mentioned this earlier, which is why we recommend people be active and increase their muscle mass. So yes, it does have a higher metabolic rate. It does burn more calories at rest. Not as much calories as people like to think, but as I said, there are a lot of benefits to improving your body composition beyond the fact that you may be burning more calories at rest. There are a number of hormones that can be involved in weight control. And these are the hormones that may be involved in that set point theory. Leptin is a hormone that's produced by fat cells that tends to lower or slow metabolism, while ghrelin tends to stimulate appetite. It tends to be released before meals and can be reduced by exercise. It's thought that if this set point theory was indeed a fact, if it could be proved to be correct in humans, that when you lose weight, when you go below your set point, that might increase the ghrelin. And when your weight goes above that predetermined set point, you might increase your leptin amount. Heredity can be involved in weight. These are pictures of the same young man who at the age of 3, on the left, you can see he was large, but by the age of 7, he had grown. What was found out was that this young man experienced a deficiency in the production of leptin. And leptin's that hormone that makes you feel full. And if you have a deficiency of leptin, then you won't experience fullness and you would continue to eat. Once this young man's leptin was replaced, he began to experience normal regulation of calories in versus calories out, and he took off that weight. When this was discovered, it was thought that perhaps leptin could help people lose weight, that giving people leptin would help lower their appetite and make them feel fuller sooner. However, what was discovered was that giving folks leptin only worked if you were leptin deficient. That didn't prevent snake oil salesmen from trying to sell you books and supplements based on this information. Obese people have billions more fat cells than people of average weight. And heredity can also affect the number of fat cells that you have, but dietary habits also contribute. Fat cells don't seem to go away when you're losing weight, and our fat cells are living, active cells that send out lots of signals, and the hypothalamus is an organ in the brain that I mentioned earlier that may be controlling weight. Women tend to have a higher percent of what's called essential fat than men. It's essential because it's used for pregnancy, for child rearing, for producing hormones to feed the newborn. And it may be one of the reasons why it's easier for men to keep off weight than it is for women. Women may be able to lose weight, but it may be harder for them to keep it off. And part of it may have to do with this essential fat. Let's look a little bit more closely at adipose tissue. And adipose is another name for fat. This is a picture on the left of adipose tissue that is made up of lots and lots of adipose cells. It stores excess energy as fat, and that energy can come from too much protein, too much carbohydrate, or too much fat. Any macronutrient consumed in excess of what the body needs will be stored as fat. Adipose tissue also sends out signals, and that can help regulate energy balance. So adipose tissue or adipose cells regulate energy balance through different hormone production, and these hormones can be that leptin and that ghrelin. Our adipocytes, adipocyte is another name for fat cell. And the number and the size of these fat cells can affect our ability to maintain a healthy weight. Hypertrophic growth refers to increase in cell size. Hyperplastic growth refers to increase in cell number. And how does that bear out when we're looking at weight control? This is a fat cell. It has a mitochondria, it has a nucleus, it has cytoplasm like all other cells, but it has this central core of triglyceride, and triglyceride is a type of fat. During weight gain, fat cells increase in size and or number. So in this first part of the slide, the example shows that during hypertrophic growth, when you are in positive energy balance, the cell is increasing in size, experiencing hypertrophic growth. But what can also happen is that the cells can increase in number. This is referred to as hyperplastic growth. So when intake continues to be greater than energy expenditure, not only do the fat cells increase in size, but they increase in number. The thing is that when you lose weight, when you begin to lose body fat, those cells decrease in size, but they don't necessarily decrease in number. And that hypothesis may explain why for some people it's harder to keep weight off. They have the same number of fat cells, the fat cells just don't contain the same amount of fat. And because those fat cells are always present, it may, and the operative word here is may, make it easier to put weight back on. Other factors that may be related to increasing weight: being inactive. People who tend to be inactive may have a tendency to gain weight more quickly, and it may be more difficult if they lose weight to keep that weight off. There are certain issues with eating behaviors. Perhaps eating too fast can contribute to becoming overweight because you lose out on those signals that tell you you're full. Fast food, God, that stuff's easy to inhale, as my mother used to say. And we may not be paying attention to those food cues that tell us that we're hungry or that tell us about what we're hungry for. And there are folks who are emotional eaters. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about eating disorders. We tend to have a lot of different types of hunger, but we tend to feed them all with food. How do we control excess weight? We go back to that balance. But I will tell you that this is very easy to say, just with that in quotes, eat less and exercise more. That's the easy part. Consuming less calories, decreasing intake and increasing expenditure can certainly help draw on fat stores and help you lose body fat. That's the easy part of the equation. And we'll get to the harder part in a second. But the benefits of exercise, I'm sure you've heard of them. I'm sure you know them. And you can have a look at them here. And there's a lot of fad diets out there. Maybe when we get together, you can tell me what are some of the ones you've heard of. I used to say diets don't work. But now what I do say is all diets work while you're on them. The proof is in the maintenance. And here are some examples of diets that people have been on. And low carb is very popular now. No carb is crazy. I would really like to hear from you about what are some of the diets you've heard or that are popular that you know folks have been on and how well that's worked. This last one here, Nutrisystem, this is one of those prepackaged foods where they send you stuff, and I just have anecdote alert, some quotes from people who've used Nutrisystem. The dehydrated hamburger becomes meat mush when prepared. Tuna and chicken salad are puree. The chocolate tastes like eating sawdust, and that's a sin. Quote, some of my patients have complained that the meals are bland, unpalatable, and taste like cardboard. This is also one of my favorite red alerts because there's lots of fraud diets out there. I lost $350 in 2 weeks. Just ask me how. Remember, if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Beware of weight loss supplements that are advertised as dietary supplements. What you need to know is that supplements are not regulated by the government, and what's on the label isn't necessarily what's in the product. Please be careful. While I generally am not concerned about your generic vitamin mineral supplement, I do worry about weight loss supplements, sports supplements, sexual enhancement supplements, because these can be contaminated with drugs. And weight loss supplements are not exempt. There was a medication that was taken off the market because of adverse effects, and it was found to be in a natural weight loss supplement. So yes, people lost weight when they took this supplement, but it wasn't because of any of the magic that was in the supplement or it's being natural. It's because it contained a drug that had been taken off the market. So some of these supplements can suppress appetite and may be okay. And I have here herbal stimulants, but again, what's on the label isn't necessarily what's in the product. And here are some of examples of supplements out here. This one in the lower left is one I took when I was younger, when I was overweight. And it kind of wouldn't be advertised now, but these were these little candies that came with a piece of paper that was basically a 1,200 calorie diet. It was take 2 of these with each meal and follow this diet and you'll lose weight. Well, if you just followed a 1,200 calorie diet and didn't take those candies, you would have lost weight anyway. And of course, Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz has something for everybody that probably shouldn't be talking to anybody. Then there are actual weight loss medications, not supplements, but medications. Here are some examples. Although I think I've read something recently about Belviq. I'm not going to ask you to give me examples of these. What I want you to know is that there are supplements and there are medications and the risks of taking supplements. There are fat-blocking drugs. Xenical is one of them. I think it's now referred to as Ally. It blocks the absorption of about 25% of the fat that people consume. That which does not get digested and absorbed, that's what blocking does. It ultimately gets excreted, not necessarily when you want to excrete it. So it comes with risks. Surgery is another option. And I will include these video links on Blackboard for you to have a look. One of the surgeries is the gastric sleeve, where you are having a portion of your stomach removed. Up to 70% of the stomach is removed. So you are still digesting food. It's still going through your stomach. It's just that the stomach is a lot smaller. You have to eat a lot less. You need to work with a dietitian if you're going to be having this surgery. Well, any kind of surgery that is related to bariatric surgery. And the gastric bypass, please have a look at this video as well. What it involves is reducing the size of the stomach and bypassing segments of the small intestine. So now you not only have a tiny pouch where your stomach used to be, but you're also bypassing sections of the small intestine where nutrients are absorbed. So folks who have bypass surgery have to pay a lot of attention to the types of food they're eating, as well as the supplements they need to take in order to get the nutrients they need, because their body's not able to get them from food and from absorption from the small intestine. This slide shows 2 procedures, stomach stapling and vertical banded gastroplasty. Where it says staples, you can see where stapling of the stomach can occur. And then where the gastric band is, shows you that a band could be put around a part of the stomach. Now, the band could be loosened or tightened, but the staples, the concern with staples had to do with side effects. The staples could get separated. I think that's a kind way of saying the staples burst, but they had a lot of problems. So stomach stapling and gastroplasty are not as effective as the procedures shown in the 2 previous slides. I want to talk to you about the difference between weight loss and fat loss, because, and I'm guilty of it as well. I talk about weight loss and people wanting to lose weight. Really what I want to refer to is fat loss. I think when most people talk about wanting to see a change in the scale, they want to change their body composition so that they have less body fat and increase muscle mass. What you need to understand is that there is a difference between weight loss and fat loss. I'm sitting here right now recording this, but I weigh about 145 pounds. And if I drank a quart of water, 32 ounces, and I got back on the scale, I would weigh 147 pounds. We all know that I didn't just put on 2 pounds of fat. I put on 2 pounds of weight. Weight loss is what occurs when someone goes on a fad or a crash diet. Weight loss is something that occurs quickly. It results in a loss of lean body mass or muscle mass. It includes water loss, and it tends to be temporary because you didn't change the behaviors that led you to overeat to begin with. What I like to do when I'm working with people is focus on fat loss. And fat loss takes time. But when you are working on fat loss, when you decrease your calories in, when you increase your calories out, change the behaviors that led you to overeat to begin with, you will draw on your fat stores, you will preserve your muscle mass, and hopefully maintain that weight loss. I'm sorry, see, I did it again, and hopefully maintain that fat loss. So please know the difference between weight loss and fat loss and the risks associated with just trying to quickly lose weight. Fat loss takes time. I want to go over a study that was done at the NIH on showing how ultra-processed diets caused an excess of calories consumed and an increase in weight. This was a study that was done in a metabolic ward. Actually, it says here, a metabolic clinical research unit at the National Institutes of Health. It was done by Dr. Kevin Hall. The purpose of the study, let's see, do I have this here? The purpose of the study was to look at whether ultra-processed foods resulted in increased intake and increased weight gain or fat gain versus unprocessed foods. There is actually a criteria for what's considered ultra-processed and unprocessed, and they used these criteria when they were planning the meals for the folks. Now, this was a short study. It was 2 weeks on one diet and 2 weeks on the other, but it was done in a metabolic ward where they were able to control everything that was going in and everything that was coming out, and they did blood work. So it's a good start. The results of the study showed that when folks, when folks were on the ultra-processed diet, they tended to eat an average of 500 calories more each day, resulting in an increase of 2 pounds of fat for over the 2 weeks that they were on the diet. When they were on the unprocessed diet, they tended to average a decrease of 500 calories per day, resulting in a loss of 2 pounds over a week's time. Now, this is a study where they weren't eating a measured amount of food. They could eat as much as they wanted. It was just afterwards they measured how much folks had eaten. So that's how they knew how many calories they were consuming. And the results showed that when folks were on the unprocessed diet, they lost 2 pounds over the 2-week period. And when they were on the ultra-processed diet, they gained a pound a week or 2 pounds over the 2-week period. Dr. Hall wanted to make sure, though, that before national guidelines were made that discourage ultra-processed foods, people should be mindful of the fact that time, skill, expertise, and effort to prepare meals from minimally processed foods requires resources that are often in short supply. I think we read a lot about how we should be eating unprocessed foods, that we should be eating fresh fruits and vegetables, but the reality is not everybody has access, time, skill, everything that he's saying here, that people should be working on other ways to help get these skills to folks in order to help change their food processing, in order to help them to prepare foods that are less processed. Here's some pictures of the foods that were in this study. On the left, this was This was breakfast. On the right, this was the unprocessed. Lunch on processed. Lunch on unprocessed. Oh, these glasses here on the left, that's Crystal Light with the fiber supplement, because as it turns out, ultra-processed diets tend to have very little fiber in them. Dinner on ultra-processed, dinner on unprocessed. Now, to me, the unprocessed food looks really good, and I would probably choose those foods. However, they did evaluate folks, they did ask them, and apparently the appearance and the taste of the food was appealing in both unprocessed and ultra-processed. So go figure. Here's a formula to help give you an idea of how to lose body fat. It's suggesting being in a deficit of 500 calories per day, just like the folks that lost a pound of fat per week in the previous study. When you're in negative energy balance to the tune of 500 calories a day, that's about 3,500 calories a week, which should result in a loss of 1 pound of fat. So one way of getting into a 500 calorie deficit would be 40 minutes of aerobic exercise, cutting out 200 calories. So you would be in a deficit of 500 calories per day. And this should, the operative word is should, result in a pound per week of body fat while preserving muscle mass. And that's what you want to do. You want to preserve your lean muscle mass. You don't want to lose muscle while you're trying to lose body fat. A faster rate of weight loss forces the body to use muscle protein to meet the energy needs of the body. The benefits of exercise, okay, so here's a whole lot. You can have a look at them at your own time. But I do want to remind you that overexercising one area of the body does not result in spot reduction. I think the only way you lose spot reduction is liposuction. And the fact of the matter is you can still gain fat back, but just around that one spot. You won't gain fat, and it'll probably look pretty weird. Weight loss strategies, you want to have eating plans that are realistic, that result in small changes over time. You want to increase your activity, and I tell folks, pick something that you like. You know, if you don't like to run, don't run. If you don't like to swim, don't swim. Find something that you like to do. And this is the hardest part that I mentioned earlier, all right? The decreasing intake and the increasing expenditure, that's the easy part. This is the hard part, changing the behaviors that led you to overeat to begin with. So you need to be realistic. You should work with somebody to help you maintain behaviors or to make behavior changes that you can live with. If you like Oreo cookies, I would never tell you to eliminate Oreo cookies. I might say, well, see how you can do with eating 3 of them instead of 6 of them. Oh, am I talking about myself again? Well, the idea is to set realistic goals, and this is the hardest part. Before we go, I just want to remind you that there are no foods, combinations of foods, or special formulas or pills that will burn off, melt away, or rearrange fat. Let me just say that one more time. There are no foods, combinations of foods, special formulas, or pills that will burn off, melt away, or rearrange fat. All right, folks, I'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves.